Property Tribes, we are able to maintain our forums as a free-to-use community resource thanks to the support of our suppliers and partners. And within that, we have some absolute experts and authorities on their topic. And one of them is the most amazing Mr. Bill Irvine of UC Advice. And Bill, we are long overdue for a catch-up, aren't we?
We certainly are. Good to see you again.
Well, likewise. And there's so much to talk about. And, you know, your work covers such a broad range of everything to do with universal credit and housing benefit, LHA, etc. You're very busy. You put out these amazing bulletins. And I think a good place to start would be in April, there was a notification of increase of LHA rates, which is good news for landlords, but it's caused confusion as well, hasn't it?
It certainly has. Probably the bulletins I sent out on that have attracted more attention than any in the recent past. The problem was that the government announced we're going to increase the LHA rates with effect from the 1st of April. And most landlords assumed that they would then be paid, or the tenants would be paid from the 1st of April. But what happened was when they uprate benefits, they uprate them from a date, usually the second week of the tax year. In this case, it was the 8th of April. And what they basically said was that you'll be paid the new rate if your benefit assessment period starts on the 8th of April. So somebody whose benefit assessment runs from the 8th of April to the 7th of May, they would receive the increased rates round about the first week in May. But if somebody's benefit assessment started on the 1st of April, they actually had to wait until the 1st of May before that would actually kick in, and they wouldn't receive the payment until sometime in June. So we tried to set it out, we tried to explain it all, and I think most people grasp it, but even the DWP staff themselves were getting this wrong. The other thing was that the social landlords who increased their rents either on the 1st or the 5th of April, they weren't affected in the same way. If their tenants applied to get the new rate and notified the DWP of the change in circumstances, they were effectively paid from the 1st of April. And that's because the way in which the mechanics of doing that. So that created a bit of problems, particularly for the private sector landlord.
And some of them have had trouble in accessing the higher rates due to, non-existent communication with a tenant or something like that. So yeah, it's still challenging for private landlords to access these higher rates, isn't it? In some circumstances.
Some of them still not received it, because one of the things that DWP has insisted on is that it's the tenant's benefit. So it's up to them to respond and provide notifications through their journal. Whereas the actual law basically says that the landlord is obliged to notify where they're receiving direct payments, the change in circumstances. So when the landlord actually notified the DWP, in my mind, the DWP could then have acted on that, because they now were aware of the change in circumstances. The landlord had provided it, the law provides for that, but they're insistent, no, we're not going to act on that until such time as the tenant has reported it. And most tenants have reported it, but there's still, maybe say 10% who have failed to, for whatever reason, not reported that change in circumstances. So while that applies, they will not receive the increased rates. So their rent arrears are going to build up until such time as they correct that error or oversight. And in my view, there should be no need for that, because the regulations allows the landlord to report it, and they should act on that.
Well, your consultancy, you deal with everybody from a single private sector landlord, you assist tenants as well, and you also do some very, very big cases that are actually setting precedents, and you've had one recently, haven't you?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest issues that landlords talk about on the various forums, including Property Tribes, is overpayments. So one of the recent ones I dealt with involved £250,000, where the tenants were happily receiving their universal credit with their housing costs included. And then one of the London boroughs intervened and said, "Oh, you shouldn't be paying that. We should be paying that because these people are living in temporary accommodation."
Mm.
When in fact, none of the people were living in temporary accommodation. And I wrote to the council concerned and explained to them why that was correct. And in fact, one of the senior managers in the council actually agreed with me, but her subordinates didn't. So that case took 3 years to get to, well, 2.5 years to get to a hearing. And it was only at that point when the judge pressed them and said, "Look, you haven't responded to Mr. Irvine's submission. From what I can see, this appears not to be temporary accommodation." And they had a barrister. So the barrister took 5 minutes out with the client, then came back and confirmed, "You're right, my client's now conceded the point." 2.5 years it took to concede, and another 6 months before it was finally concluded. So on the one hand, my client's now delighted that all of that is going to be restored, but for that period of time, received no money for 16 tenants for 2.5 years.
It's
And
amazing
some,
that they stuck with the tenants as well because they didn't,
yeah,
try and evict them. They worked with the tenants to try and work this problem out, didn't they?
absolutely. And that's a commitment they gave and they fulfilled. On the other side of the coin, the council failed to actually fulfill their commitment. And it was, just ridiculous what happened. And some of the judges that became involved in the case as well didn't do a particularly good job either, because some of these judges at the first tier are maybe not as au fait with things as the judges at the higher tier, the upper tier. But the judge who finally dealt with it knew exactly what to do, and that's how it was put to bed. But these type of overpayment cases now are arising over and over again because DWP has set up a team of, by the end of this year, there'll be 6,000 staff involved in it. And what they're doing is they call them the enhanced review team. And what they're doing is they are going back over existing awards and asking people to submit yet again a copy of their tenancy agreement, a copy of their ID, a copy of their utility bills. And what they're doing is they're comparing that information with information previously provided. The idea is to try and catch out fraud that's taking place. And we would all applaud if that was what was happening at the end of the day. But what's happening is that in the crossfire, many legitimate claims are actually being suspended for months on end, where the individuals are not getting any payments at all, not even their personal allowance. I mean, having to borrow from friends to exist. But the landlord is receiving no housing costs. And then eventually when it's sorted, they don't, in some cases, go back and actually pay the back money for the housing costs. So there's a big rent arrear. Now, when I get involved in most of these cases, we do get them resolved, but it can sometimes take me, despite all my years of experience, months before we eventually get it resolved. So some landlords, I'm pretty sure, will have lost out, given up, because they think, we can't do any more to try and help our tenants here.
Well, we will link to your blog about your tribunal results. It's a very in-depth explanation of what's happened and the outcome, which you were able to bring about. But I think what it shows is so many flaws within the council in question and the DWP, and they had they didn't make the correct submissions to the court. They didn't turn up with the right papers. I mean, it just sounds like it's quite concerning that these bodies that are dealing with this issue do not seem to fully understand it themselves, and are not acting in the correct manner for everything. So I do urge everybody to read your blog, Bill, because it really does show some concerns about how these bodies operate.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to a tribunal, the various parties, in this case, there was a council, the DWP, my clients, and me as the representative, all parties are expected to collaborate to try and resolve the issues before an appeal is actually held. And then when it gets to an appeal, it's supposed to be a situation where it's not like court where you're at odds with each other. You're actually trying to find a solution. But that didn't happen here. It was a bun fight between the council on the one hand saying we should be paying housing benefit, and the DWP on the other hand saying no, we're correct. to pay universal credit. And I don't usually agree with the DWP, but in this instance, it was pretty straightforward. But the sad thing is they later admitted they don't actually have any staff that understand what temporary accommodation is. This is the DWP, nor do they understand what supported accommodation is, which is a wee bit more difficult to understand. And that was the sad thing about it. Whereas the council, whose housing benefit team was in the housing department, all they needed to do was to lift the phone and say to housing options, have these people been assessed under the Homeless Persons Act? Have you decided they are a priority need, etc.? Because that's the way they are again given accommodation by the council. None of that happened. Many of these people had tenancies for 7 years. Had never been assessed, never applied under the Homeless Persons Act. So it should have been straightforward, but it took 2.5 years to get that concession.
Well, as we know, temporary accommodation and supported living is a very big growth area for landlords. And I'm sure we're going to see more and more of these type of problems, occurring. Let's move on a little bit, Bill, because since we last spoke, obviously we've had an election and we've got a Labour government now. Do you have any thoughts on what Labour will be doing in this area?
Well, I think they're already starting to show their hand. I heard yesterday in the news that they were talking about removing the two-child cap that's been in place since April 2017. Maybe not the highest priority for landlords, but the effect of that cap was if you had a third child or a fourth child after 2017, they would not get any more benefit. But the Labour Party is now talking about removing that cap. And if you're in the likes of the high rented areas like London, Birmingham, in the city centre areas where rents are very high, that will benefit if they did remove the benefits cap. If they did remove it, then that would certainly benefit a lot of these people who at the moment are getting paid sometimes £200 and £300 less than they should be getting paid. Or worse still, certainly in the areas of London and North London especially, what's happening is the DWP, rather than capping the individual's personal element of the benefit, what they are doing is they are actually paying all of the benefit to the individuals. So if you're a single person, say over 25 just now, you're entitled to roughly about £400 per month. If you're in London living there and your rent, let's say, is £1,300, that would bring your potential benefit up to £1,700. But because of the cap kicks in, so your benefit might be reduced by £400 or £500. And what DWP has said that their policy level is, if that individual asks for all of the money to be paid directly to them, they pay it. So every month goes by, that tenant is expected then to pay the landlord the money. And many of them don't. What they do is they use the money for everything other than paying the rent. So I've got people contacting me, pulling their hair out, and particularly in London, saying, I've got £6,000 rent arrears, £10,000 rent arrears. This guy's getting his money and misusing his money all the time. DWP is aware, by the way, that he's misusing his money and doing nothing about it. And yet the Secretary of State has an obligation to protect public funds. And the other thing, and I've contacted the LHA about this, is that the actual payment direct to a landlord is a discretionary matter. So you look at it in an individual case, or that's how it should be done. But in some areas of London, the DWP staff are actually being instructed not to do that and actually pay the money to the individual. Now, when you do that, it's called fettering your discretion, which is illegal. And we should be challenged, landlords should be challenging that because it's public money. And despite raising the profile or trying to raise the profile of it, that continues today. And DWP believe what they're doing is correct, when in fact it's not correct.
Well, you have some statistics of how much direct payments landlord is for private sector landlords and social landlords, and there's quite a big discrepancy, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, the case of private landlords, under housing benefit, roughly about 33 to 35% of housing benefit was paid to the private landlord. And there was rules there, and there was the rights of appeal. If a landlord asked for it and it was refused, they could appeal to a tribunal. But under universal credit, it's a discretionary matter, as I mentioned a minute ago there. And there's only 5% of the applications from landlords in the private sector being paid. Whereas on the social landlord sector, if you're a council or a housing association, the average is 35%. And some of them are actually getting more, a lot more than that, 50, 60% paid directly to them. So the landlord, the private landlord, again, has been discriminated against quite clearly. And that's been known for quite a number of years by some of the DWP ministers who've said that's wrong, we should be kind of trying to do something to correct that. But it still continues today.
Well, these matters do need to be resolved because it probably is going to deter landlords from renting to tenants in receipt of housing benefit because we hear of these issues arising all the time. It is very concerning, some of the things that you've mentioned on this call. You've got another tribunal coming up as well, haven't you, Bill?
Yeah, just on that last point, Vanessa, I would say that the other thing about it, it's a bit of a lottery. Now, I live in Scotland, although most of the work I do is actually south of the border. And I never really get many private landlords or indeed social landlords contact me and say, look, we've got a problem here. Similarly, the north of England, both in the west and the east coast, I don't really get that problem. It's where you go down south. Once you go south of Manchester, that's when you seem to get more and more of these problems. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. And the likes of Sunderland and Newcastle and areas like that, I think the DWPs just make payments directly to the landlords. That's why I don't get as many calls.
Mm.
But getting back to what you were asking me there, we've got a case now. It's actually an overpayment case again. It's a case involving £37,000 where the tenant actually vacated the property during COVID, and the landlord notified the DWP and the council of this. The council then get a phone call and were told she's now been evicted by the bailiffs. And then a month later, they get another email saying, we remind you that she was actually moved out, so stop paying us housing benefit. And three other occasions, they also emailed later, 2 years down the road, you're still paying us the benefit. So in that particular case, we appealed the recovery from the landlord on the basis that there was either an official error or it was caused by the neglect of the tenant. Now, that particular case is now going to what they call a tribunal of judges, which is the kind of highest level. And what they'll do is they'll make a ruling. And I think the reason why they picked it out as being so important is some of the issues. The first tier tribunal judge basically said that the landlord had sent notification via email, and he said that that wasn't appropriate. That had to be done either by post to the council or by electronic means through a portal. Now, the landlord doesn't actually have a portal. The portal is designed for the actual claimant themselves, not for the landlord. So that's one of the features. The other thing is, I think what the judges are going to do is that the housing benefit regulations were created in 2006. We're now some years later. The law and also the world has changed in that time. Nowadays, housing benefit, when you claim it, it's done online. Even with DWP, everything's done online using these journals. So I think what this tribunal is going to do is look at the new way of doing things and actually spell out what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, so that everybody knows exactly where they are. And there still will be an obligation on the claimant to report changes in circumstances, which in this case the tenant failed to do. Equally, the landlord will have an obligation where they get payments direct. But what this tribunal will do is probably set out what the parameters are, what type of things they should do and when they should do it and who they should send the information to. And then once that is determined, that law is likely to apply for many years to come. The last time I did one of these was 40 years ago. And that particular case is a case called R in brackets SB for Supplementary Benefit 984. And that law still applies today. It was actually about backdating for people with learning difficulties. And I was representing three of the cases, and we were successful in getting the rights for the individual, some with Down syndrome, etc., allowing the benefits to be backdated without limit in those cases. So these type of things happen only periodically, but so once they happen, they're very important.
Well, Bill, it's a testament to your knowledge and your work in this sector that you're still working on these kind of cases 40 years later, and they've set precedents that have been adhered to. So thank you so much for all the work you do. And you have your consultancy. If Property Tribes members require your help, how does that work?
Well, if they can become a member of the website, first of all, which is Universal Credit Advice. But for the private sector, it's £80 per year plus VAT. And what they get is my regular bulletins, but they also can contact me and ask me. A lot of times, landlords contact me and say, "Look, we've got this particular family bill. How do we set up the tenancy agreement? How do we maximise the return for the individual, but also protect ourselves and ensure that we don't run up rent arrears?" And I get involved in disputes, and sometimes when I get involved in these cases involving the overpayments or underpayments, etc., then I work in a no-win, no-fee basis in most cases. So if I don't succeed, they don't pay me anything. But generally speaking, I get paid most of the time, and I take a small percentage of whatever the backdate money is, or how much I save the individual. And that seems to be a bit of a no-brainer for most of the landlords that I deal with.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this call and giving us the latest from the world of universal credit and housing benefit. And we will put links to Bill's website below the video, and also to the blog that we discussed earlier. But for now, Bill, thank you very much, as always, for the work you do in our sector. And it's so wonderful to have somebody with your immense knowledge and domain expertise and authority as part of the PT community. So don't go changing.
Thank you very much.